I should have turned around the moment I saw the booth. That is what I tell myself now. Crouched behind a barrel of salted fish in the back room of a chandler's shop in the village of Grenwick, 3 days' hard ride from Aldenmere, listening to the sound of very large boots on the cobblestones outside. The booth had a hand-painted sign in green and gold. It had a jar of dried moon clover on the table, the kind that smells like rain and sounds like wisdom if you've never actually smelled wisdom. It had a woman behind it, small and quick-eyed, with a deck of cards fanned on the cloth in front of her, and the expression of someone who had no idea she was about to ruin my life and hers in the same afternoon. I was in Aldenmere for the harvest market. This was 8 weeks ago. I am the Alpha King of Aldenmere. I do not generally browse fortune-teller booths at market days, and I will say in my defense that it was my steward Pell who stopped walking first. Pell is 61 years old and has the skeptical disposition of a man who has survived 3 Alpha Kings and 2 contested inheritances. And even he stopped. Seer of the 7 Fates, he read from the sign. He said it the way you say something you are deciding whether to find funny. The woman behind the table glanced up. She had brown eyes and ink on her left hand, and the look of someone who had been on her feet since before dawn, and was willing to be pleasant about it for approximately 3 more minutes. Fortunes told, she said. Past and present for a copper coin. Future for 2. I offer a full 4-card reading for 5, which includes a complimentary moon clover sachet. My Alpha King, Pell said, requires no sachet. She looked at me. I was wearing my riding cloak, the plain brown one, not the fur-trimmed state cloak, which was a mistake, in retrospect, because she did not visibly calculate her approach. She simply looked at me the way you look at a very large piece of furniture someone has moved into an unexpected location. He can have a reading without the sachet, then, she said. 5 coins for 4 cards, 4 cards for your future. The moon's road, the fork, the hidden, and the last turn. They tell you what's coming. She paused. More or less. More or less, I repeated. The moon is interpretive. She said this with complete dignity, as though it settled something. Pell made a sound that was not quite a cough. I have no idea why I sat down. I had reports to review and a supply dispute from the eastern border that had been waiting 3 days for my attention. I sat down anyway. The woman, Senna, I would learn later. Herbalist and occasional fortune teller, and person of no fixed pack affiliation, shuffled the cards with the efficient ease of someone who had done it hundreds of times, and set 4 of them face down on the cloth between us. She looked at me when she set them down, not at the cards, at me. A quick, careful look, the kind that assesses without appearing to, and then she settled back and turned the first card. Moon's Road, she said. It showed a wolf standing at the edge of a frozen lake. The ice was cracked but holding. The wolf's posture was patient, not afraid. Ears forward, weight settled. The particular stillness of something that has been waiting long enough to have made peace with the waiting. This one says you've been standing at the edge of something for a long time, she said. Not afraid of it, just waiting. You've convinced yourself you're being patient, but you're mostly just not moving. She tilted her head. That's not a criticism. The ice is holding. I said nothing. Pell, to my left, was suddenly very interested in his boot buckle. The fork, she said, and turned the second card. 2 paths on a mountain, one lit by sun, one by moon. The sun path was broad and direct. The moon path curved out of sight behind a rock face and looked like a worse idea in every visible respect. You're going to choose the one that makes less sense to you, she said. She said it the way you state a fact about weather, not the expected path, the one that feels wrong by every calculation you know how to run, and it's going to be exactly right. She studied the card for a moment. You've probably already started choosing it and don't know it yet. That is very vague, I said. Fortunes are vague by nature, she said agreeably. They're more of a direction than a destination. Like compass headings. You know which way you're facing. The rest is walking. She turned the third card, the hidden. A woman standing in a field of silver grass, her back to the viewer, a wolf at her left side. The card was old. The colors rubbed soft at the edges. The woman's figure nearly worn through at the shoulders where the card had been handled many times. Someone had cared for this deck for a long time. Senna looked at it for a moment that ran a beat too long. There's someone, she said, and her voice shifted slightly. the practiced market day ease dropping a fraction of its brightness. Someone you haven't found yet. Or, you've been near her and didn't know it. She cleared her throat. The card usually refers to a hidden truth, or a person concealed from their own nature. Someone who doesn't know what she is to you. Sometimes it means she doesn't know what she is to herself. She said the last part more quietly. I noticed that she did not look at me when she said it. The warmth I felt then I attributed to the afternoon sun on the back of my neck. It was a very specific warmth, low and settled, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting a long time for the right shape. I noted it and said nothing. Last turn, she said, and turned the fourth card. A man and a woman, facing each other, neither moving. Between them, the card showed only a thin line of gold, not a mark, not a flame, just a line, fine as thread, connecting them at the wrists. She looked at it for a long moment, then she looked at me. You're going to stand in front of someone, she said, and be entirely unable to move, not from fear, from recognition. She set the card down carefully, squaring it with the others. You'll know who she is before you have the words for it, and you won't be able to pretend you don't. A pause, then, more quietly, neither will she. She sat back. That's the full reading. The sachet is also available. I paid her 5 coins. I did not take the sachet. I stood up, told Pell to note the booth's location in case I wanted to ask a follow-up question. I don't know why I said that. I had never in my life asked a fortune teller a follow-up question, and walked back to the hold. That was 8 weeks ago. 3 of the 4 predictions have come true. The first one landed 9 days after the market. My master of coin came to me with a proposal for the eastern border dispute. Not the obvious answer, not the diplomatic compromise I had been calculating for 3 days. A third route I hadn't considered, the one that made less sense by every calculation I knew how to run. I sat with it for an evening, looked at the numbers twice, and then signed the order. And it worked. The fork. I would have dismissed it as coincidence, except that Pell had been there at the booth, and Pell does not believe in coincidence any more than he believes in free sachet. He said nothing when I signed the order. He only looked at his boot buckle again, which I was beginning to understand was his version of a very expressive reaction. The second prediction came 3 weeks later. A supply convoy came in from the west. Routine, unremarkable, the usual stack of dispatches. One of the drivers had tucked an additional letter into the bundle, passed to him from a Pack 3 territories south. There was a woman, the letter said, a healer with no pack affiliation who had been moving through the mountain settlements, and who had apparently pulled 4 of their wolves from a rock slide the previous autumn at considerable personal risk, with no expectation of payment or recognition. They had been trying to find where she had gone. They thought she might have passed through Aldenmere during the harvest market. They described her, brown eyes, ink habitually on her left hand, quick in her movements, carrying a pack of dried herbs and a folded card cloth. That was when it stopped being a coincidence. I sent people to find her. She was already gone. Senna, herbalist, no pack, no fixed address, had left Aldenmere the morning after the market day. She had been in the village of Thornstep for 2 weeks the previous spring, in a fishing settlement called Wrenwater before that, and in Aldenmere for the harvest market and then abruptly not. The inn where she had rented a room said she had left in a hurry, which the innkeeper mentioned with some feeling, because she had left a very good jar of dried moonclover behind, and the innkeeper had not known what to do with it. They had put it on the windowsill. It was still there. It smelled like rain. I sent 2 more riders east that week. Both of them came back with the same account. She had passed through, she had been helpful to several people, she had been well liked, and she had been gone by the time they arrived. She moved with the easy efficiency of someone who had been doing it for years. No fixed schedule, no announced destination, nothing that would let anyone predict where she was going next. Pell, reviewing the rider reports on a Thursday afternoon, noted that she seemed to be moving in a rough arc south and east of Aldenmere. He said it in the completely neutral tone he uses when he is conveying information he does not wish to editorialize. He then looked at his boot buckle. I told him to prepare a map. The third prediction came 5 weeks ago. My wolf had been quiet for years. Not grieving, not absent, simply folded away from the question of a mate, with the patience of something that had decided to wait, without knowing what it was waiting for. He went still during a council meeting on a Tuesday morning, ears lifted toward the south-facing window, as though he had caught a thread of something on the air that the rest of the room could not sense. The council meeting continued around me. I did not hear much of it. That afternoon, Pell found a message from the village of Fenwick that a woman matching the healer's description had been seen at their autumn fair, performing readings, selling dried herbs, and making herself very useful at the blacksmith's, with some knowledge of poultice work that the blacksmith's apprentice had apparently found remarkable. My wolf, who had not shown strong interest in any direction for years, pointed south and did not stop. I rode out the next morning. She had been in Fenwick. She had spent 6 days there, sold some dried herbs and performed some readings, and had apparently been told by the village elder that a king's rider had been asking questions in the next settlement because she had left Fenwick at first light the morning I arrived. The elder told me this with the polite evasiveness of someone who liked her and did not intend to help me find her any faster than strictly necessary. Did she say why she was leaving? I asked. The elder considered this at some length. He was a large man, silver-haired, with the calm of someone who had lived in the same place his entire life and had developed, over that time, a very accurate sense of when to be helpful and when to be slow about it. She said the air was getting complicated, he said. And did she say which direction she was going? Another long pause. East. So she knew I was looking, and she was running, deliberately, efficiently, with the practiced ease of someone who had been somewhere and moving on for years, and knew precisely how to do it quickly. I should have found that irritating. I am a king. I have 300 wolves, a working border dispute resolution, and a supply chain that now functions correctly because I chose the less obvious path when a fortune teller at a market booth told me to. I have never in my entire reign chased a person who did not want to be found. It is not the sort of thing kings do. I followed her to Grenwick. I know she is here because my wolf told me so, which is the sort of sentence I would have found faintly embarrassing 8 weeks ago. He pointed east this morning with the certainty of a compass needle and has not deviated. When I rode into Grenwick an hour ago, the warmth behind my sternum, that low, specific key-turning warmth I first felt in a market day booth and had been carrying ever since, settled into something that felt less like a direction and more like an arrival. Not the direction-finding pull of the last 8 weeks. Something stiller. Something that had stopped moving because it had reached what it was moving toward. She is in this village. I am reasonably certain she is in the chandler's shop, based on the way my wolf has been orienting to it since I dismounted, and based on the fact that the chandler's apprentice turned a very specific shade of guilty when I asked whether anyone had come through today. He was a young man of perhaps 16, and he had the expressive face of someone who had not yet learned to control it, and the guilt on it when I described the herbalist was as clear as a signpost. I knocked on the front door of the shop. The chandler opened it. Behind him, through the shop and the back room door, I heard the very specific silence of someone trying very hard to be quiet. "Your Majesty," the chandler said. "I am looking for a woman," I said. "Traveling herbalist. Brown eyes, ink on her left hand, approximately this tall." I indicated a height. She may have mentioned something about the air becoming complicated. The chandler looked at me. Then he looked at the back room door. Then he looked at me again, with the expression of a man who is calculating several things at once, and arriving at the conclusion that honesty is the least troubling option available to him. "She is in the back," he said, "behind the fish barrel." There was a pause from behind the fish barrel. "I am not behind the fish barrel," said Senna. Her voice was exactly the same as it had been over the card cloth. Practical, quick, carrying the faint edge of someone who would like to be reasonable about this if at all possible. "The fish barrel is speaking," I said. "The fish barrel has nothing to say to kings," said the fish barrel. I thanked the chandler and walked through the shop. She was, in fact, behind the fish barrel, or rather she had been, and had, by the time I reached the back room, repositioned herself to be leaning against the wall near the barrel, with her arms folded, and an expression of complete composure that would have been significantly more convincing if she had not still been holding the lid of the barrel. She set it down when I came in. She was wearing a traveling coat, practical and dark, and she had her herbalist's pack at her feet, and there was ink on her left hand, and her brown eyes were the same as they had been over a market day card cloth 8 weeks ago, except that they were currently working very hard at looking unbothered. "Your Majesty," she said. She said it the way you say something when you have had time to decide you are going to be calm about it. "You know who I am," I said. I looked you up after the reading. She tilted her chin slightly. You're the Alpha King of Aldenmere. You signed the Eastern Border Order 5 weeks after Market Day, which is apparently being cited in supply chain scholarship, so congratulations. The fork worked out. It did, I said. And your wolf went still, or went quiet, or something. I've had 3 different messages from 3 different settlements saying you sent riders to find me, and the specific detail was always that your wolf was behaving oddly. She looked at me steadily. I'm an herbalist, Your Majesty. I gave you a 5-coin reading as a market day service. I don't actually have the gift of foresight. The cards are interpretive. I pick up on things people are already feeling and reflect them back. It's a useful skill, it's not prophecy. Whatever is happening is not because I did something. I told you those things and they came true because you were already living them. 3 of them, I said. A pause. 3, she agreed, cautiously. The 4th has not yet happened, I said. The last turn card. You'll stand in front of someone and be unable to move. You'll know who she is before you have the words for it. She looked at me, and something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not calculation. Something quieter than either of those. Something that had been sitting behind the composure like a lamp behind a curtain. Her arms were still folded, but the careful steadiness she had been holding went a degree softer, and I recognized the look because I had been wearing it for 8 weeks. The look of someone who knows something and has been making a deliberate choice not to know it. That reading was for you, she said. Not for me. The cards were between us, I said. It is possible they were not as specific about direction as you assumed. She opened her mouth, then she closed it. The warmth behind my sternum was very quiet now. Not surging, not howling, nothing dramatic. Just present, just settled, just pointing at her with the patient certainty of something that had been pointing at her since market day and had never stopped. I am going to ask you something, I said, and I would like you to answer it honestly. She waited. Since the reading, I said, have you had any? I stopped, tried to find the right word. My wolf offered nothing helpful. He was simply very still and very certain. Any feeling of a direction, a warmth, something specific and low, and not quite explainable. The composure cracked, just slightly. Not much. A single breath she did not mean to take. That could be any number of things, she said. I have poor circulation. It points northwest, I said. Specifically northwest, since this morning, when you rode east to Grenwick, and I rode south from Aldenmere. She stared at me. Mine points at you, I said. It has pointed at you since I sat down at your table. I am not a man who chases things, Senna. I run a kingdom. I have a border dispute that is now resolved and 300 wolves and a supply chain. I have not ridden out of my own territory to follow a person in my entire reign. You rode 3 days to find an herbalist behind a fish barrel, she said. I rode 3 days, I agreed, to find the woman my mate bond has been pointing to since a Tuesday in autumn, who told me my fortune as a joke and was unfortunately entirely correct. Something in her face went very still. Not the controlled stillness she had been holding since I walked in. A different kind. The kind from the last turn card. The 2 figures facing each other, neither moving, the thin line of gold between them. The recognition before the words. I'm not Pack, she said. It came out quieter than anything else she had said. I don't have a wolf. I'm a wandering herbalist with no affiliation, and a 6-year-old deck of reading cards, and ink permanently on my left hand, from a plant-pressing habit I can't seem to break. I pulled 4 wolves out of a rockslide once, but that was more about the rope and the angle than any gift. She looked at me. I told your fortune at a market day booth. You told it very accurately, I said. I tell everyone's fortune accurately, she said. I told a fisherman in Renwater that he was going to find something unexpected in the river, and he found a child's lost boat, and he was thrilled, and I'm telling you that doesn't mean… Senna, I said. She stopped. Look at your wrist, I said. She looked down at her left wrist. I watched the moment she saw it. The faint warmth of a mark, pale as winter moonlight, low at the pulse point where the ink from the plant pressing stopped, and the skin was clean. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she looked at mine. The same mark, the same warmth, growing steadily since I had walked into this back room, not dramatic, not sudden, but undeniable, the way the tide is undeniable, the way the ice on the frozen lake was undeniable, cracked but holding. That, she said, with great care, was not in the reading. No, I agreed. The reading covered 4 cards. It did not cover everything. She looked at the mark again. Her expression was doing several things at once. The quick-eyed practical calculation I had watched her use on each card at the booth, and underneath it, something unguarded and wondering, as though she was looking at something she had dreamed about in fragments and not told anyone. The wandering herbalist who had been moving from settlement to settlement for years, who had no pack and no fixed address, who told fortunes at market days, and pulled wolves out of rock slides, and left before anyone could ask her to stay. I thought about the field of silver grass on the hidden card. Someone who doesn't know what she is to you. Someone who doesn't know what she is to herself. I am not asking you to do anything immediately, I said. I am not commanding or arranging or making any assumptions. I want to be very clear about that. I held out my hand, palm up, the way you offer something rather than take something. I am asking if you are willing to come back to Aldenmere long enough to see what this is. Under your own terms. You may leave whenever you like. You may continue to perform readings at market days, and I will not comment on your method. You may keep the moonclover sachet, if you still want it. I paused. I understand you left one at the inn. She looked at my hand. Then she looked at her wrist again. At the warmth there. The mark that had been quieter than mine, and was now running at exactly the same temperature. The 4th fortune, she said, mostly to herself. You'll stand in front of someone and be entirely unable to move. Are you? I asked. Unable to move? She was quiet for a moment, that lasted long enough that the candles in the front of the chandler's shop flickered from a draft through the door. I am, she said, experiencing a strong disinclination to run, which for me is essentially the same thing. Something in my chest settled into the most complete quiet I had felt in years. Not relief, something older than relief. Something that had been standing at the edge of a frozen lake and had just decided to step forward. The 4th fortune, I said I would know who she was before I had the words for it. Did you? She asked. At the market? I thought about the key turning. I thought about standing up from the booth and telling Pell to note the location in case I had follow-up questions, which I had known at the time was not about follow-up questions. I thought about the way I had looked at the hidden card, the woman in the silver field, her back to me, the wolf at her side, and felt something behind my ribs that was not quite a thought yet but was already a direction. Yes, I said. She looked at my hand for a long moment. The chandler's shop was warm and smelled of wax and salt fish and the faint green rain smell of dried moon clover from somewhere in her herbalist's pack. My wolf was entirely quiet, not waiting, arrived. The way a wolf goes quiet not from absence but from completion. When the thing it has been moving toward is finally within reach and there is nowhere left to go. I burned the cards after you left, she said, after a moment. The reading. I burned the physical cards that evening because the last turn one was making me uncomfortable. That does seem like a reasonable response, I said. It didn't help, she said. The warmth was still there the next morning. The warmth, I said, does not require the cards. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Not a performance, something genuine and a little helpless. The sound of someone setting down something they had been carrying for 8 weeks without anyone to help carry it. She looked at my hand, she looked at her own wrist, at the mark that was now clearly visible, clearly matching, clearly not going anywhere regardless of what she burned or how far east she rode. I should mention, she said, that I am genuinely not a seer. Whatever is happening is not because of my gift. I want that on the record. Noted. I said. And I do have poor circulation, she said. Also noted. And I would like to be able to continue the herbalism. I'm not simply going to stop pressing plants. Aldenmere has an excellent still room, I said. It is currently being used for storage. It could be cleared very quickly. South-facing windows, good light in the mornings. She looked at me. The composure she had been holding so carefully was gone now, replaced by something quieter and more real. The quick-eyed woman who had seen something in a 4th card and spent 8 weeks running from it, and had just now stopped. She put her hand in mine. The warmth on both our wrists settled at exactly the same moment, like 2 notes of the same chord finally sounded together. My wolf, who had been pointing at her for 8 weeks without complaint, gave one long exhale and lay down. He had been patient about it. He had never howled, never surged, never done anything dramatic. He had simply pointed, the way a compass points north, and waited for me to follow. We stood there in the back room of the chandler's shop in Grenwick, behind the fish barrel, her hand in mine, the mate mark warm at both our wrists, for long enough that the chandler eventually found a reason to clatter some things in the front of the shop to give us space, which I thought was very decent of him. "The first fortune came true in 9 days," she said, after a while. "The fork." "Yes," I said. "And the second in 3 weeks." "The hidden," when the message came from the southern pack about the healer. I paused. "That was you. 4 wolves from a rock slide." "It wasn't dramatic," she said. "They were mostly out by the time I got there. I helped with the last one." She was quiet for a moment. "That was how they described me? A healer with no pack affiliation?" "And ink on her left hand," I said. I knew from the first sentence. She looked down at her hand. The ink was there as it always was, a faint green-brown stain across the heel of her palm from the plant pressing, the kind that didn't wash out regardless of what you tried. She had stopped trying to wash it out, I would learn later, sometime in her 2nd year of traveling. It had simply become part of her hand, as fixed and unremarkable as a birthmark. "The 3rd fortune was your wolf," she said, going still. 5 weeks ago, Tuesday morning." He pointed south and did not stop pointing south for the rest of the day. She nodded slowly, working through it with the same care she had used at the booth, the practical mind accounting for each piece in turn. "And the 4th, she said. "Is this?" I said. "The 2 of us, here, unable to move." She was quiet. Then, the card showed a thin line of gold between them, at the wrists. "It did. I thought that was symbolic," she said. "It was not," I said. There was a pause. Then she laughed. A real one, warm and quick, the first I had heard from her, and it was exactly right. The sound of it settled into the back room of the chandler's shop and into the space behind my ribs where my wolf had been pointing for 8 weeks, and I understood, standing there with her hand in mine and the mate mark warm at both our wrists, that this was what the 4th card had meant by recognition before words. Not a ceremony, not a hall full of witnesses. A woman who had burned the evidence and run for 3 towns and ended up behind a fish barrel anyway, because the moon bond does not particularly care about your travel plans. We rode out of Grenwick together as the afternoon light went gold across the cobblestones, her herbalist's pack tied to the back of her horse, and a jar of moon clover sachet sitting in it. Not the one from the Aldenmere Inn, which was still presumably on the innkeeper's windowsill, but her own, which she produced from the pack when we were saddling up with the air of someone who had been intending to offer it all along, and had simply been waiting for the right moment. "Complimentary," she said, handing it to me, with a 5-coin reading. I took it. It smelled like rain, and something that was beginning, after all, to sound a great deal like wisdom. Pell, who had ridden with me from Aldenmere and had been waiting outside the chandler's shop with the patient expression of a man who has survived 3 Alpha Kings and knows how to occupy himself, looked at me when we came out. He looked at her. He looked at the matched warmth of the mate marks at both our wrists, just visible at the cuffs. He said nothing, which was exactly the right thing. He did, however, look at his boot buckle. The road back to Aldenmere takes 3 days. We spent the first night at a way-station inn, her with her plant pressing and her cards at one end of the common table, me with the supply dispatches I had brought and largely ignored at the other end. The warmth between us settled into something comfortable and unhurried, the way the mate bond settles when it has been patient long enough and can afford to breathe. She told me that the moon clover had 17 documented medicinal uses and 1 undocumented one that she suspected but hadn't been able to prove, a possible effect on the speed of bone knitting, which she had seen in 3 separate patients over 4 years, but she hadn't been able to design a proper test because she kept moving and couldn't follow any of them long enough to be certain. I told her about the eastern border dispute and why the 3rd option had worked. She asked careful questions and listened the way someone listens when they are actually interested, not when they are waiting for their turn to speak. The innkeeper brought us a 2nd round of tea without being asked, looked at the warmth of the marks at our wrists with the frank curiosity of a woman who had seen a great deal in her years running a way-station inn, said, "Well then," in a satisfied tone, and left us to it. My wolf, settled somewhere deep and content within me, did not stir at all. He had been waiting for 8 weeks. He was in no hurry now. By the second morning, she had begun telling me about the plant pressing, the ink, the field notes, the careful dried specimens layered in waxed cloth at the back of her pack, and the system she had developed over 6 years for cataloging them by region and season, and the particular quality of the light. It was a real system, meticulous and original, the kind of system a person develops when they care deeply about something and have had no one to explain it to, so they have made it very precise instead. She had been doing it since long before the traveling started, she said, since she was young, living in a settlement on the eastern edge of the territories, in a household that valued useful work and had little patience for what she found interesting. She said it without self-pity, the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had made peace with the facts of their life a long time ago and now simply reported them accurately, the way she reported what the cards showed. "You left," I said. "When I was old enough to," she said. "I had a small amount of saved money and a working knowledge of herbs and a reasonable ability to read people's faces, which turned out to be more than enough to get by." She looked out the inn window at the dark road. "The cards came later. I found the deck at a fair. An old woman selling her things, and the cards were priced to move. I bought them because the hidden card had silver grass on it, and I had seen a field like that once, on the mountain road east of Thornstep, and I thought—" She stopped. "What?" I asked. "I thought someone must have loved a place like that, to paint it," she said, "to make it into a card and carry it around for years. I wanted to carry it too. I thought about the card, the woman in the silver grass, her back to the viewer, the wolf at her side, the colors rubbed soft at the edges from years of hands. I thought about who had carried it before Senna, and what they had seen in it, and whether they had known that one day a fortune-teller in Aldenmere would lay it down between herself and a king and say, quietly, 'Someone you haven't found yet, or you've been near her and didn't know it.' And then, more quietly still, 'Sometimes it means she doesn't know what she is to herself.'" The road on the third morning showed the stone towers of Aldenmere on the horizon, and the warmth at her wrist had settled into something steady and constant, the way warmth settles into stone after a full day of sun, not a flare, not an announcement, just a presence that belongs there. "You stopped running," I said. She was quiet for a moment, watching the towers grow nearer. "I burned the fourth card," she said. "The last turn. I burned it that evening, after market day, because it was making me uncomfortable, and I thought removing it would help. It did not help. The warmth was still there the next morning. It was still there when I left Aldenmere. It was still there in Thornstep and Wrenwater and Fenwick." She glanced at me. "It has been pointing northwest for 8 weeks. And now?" I asked. She looked at the towers. "Now it is quiet," she said. "The way a compass goes quiet when it is pointing at exactly where you are." We rode through the gates of Aldenmere as the morning bell was ringing, and the pack wolves who had been watching for our return raised their voices once, briefly, in the sound that means something has come home. My wolf answered from somewhere inside my chest, low and complete and certain. The still room was cleared by the end of that first week. She has set up the plant pressing in the south window, and there is ink on her left hand, as there always is, and the moon clover on the windowsill smells like rain. The card deck sits on the small table in the parlor adjacent to the still room, and I found it there one morning when I was passing through, not burned, not folded, just sitting there, the 4 cards of a full reading in a neat row. The last turn card was back. She must have replaced it. I stood looking at it for a moment, the 2 figures facing each other, neither moving, the thin line of gold at the wrists. Then I put it back in the deck, and left it where I had found it. Some things she will arrive at in her own time. She reads for everyone who asks. The people of Aldenmere have taken to coming to the still room on market days, quietly, 1 or 2 at a time. She tells them what she told me, that it is interpretive, that the cards reflect what they are already feeling, that she cannot tell them anything they do not already know. They nod and smile and take the moon clover sachet, which she now provides to everyone without charge, having apparently decided that the complimentary policy should extend well beyond kings. She is good at it. Not because she has the gift of foresight. She insists she does not, and I have stopped arguing the point. But because she listens carefully and sees truly, and has over 6 years of wandering become very skilled at the particular art of helping people understand what they already know. She told me once, in the early weeks, that she had been moving from settlement to settlement, not because she was lost, but because nothing had felt like a reason to stay. Every place was interesting. Every place had plants she hadn't catalogued, and people whose faces she hadn't read, and river willow cuttings she hadn't pressed. She had seen more of the territories in 6 years than most people saw in a lifetime, and she did not regret any of it. She had only been lonely in the way that a person is lonely when they are good at being alone. Thoroughly, quietly, in a way that only becomes visible once the loneliness is gone. She described this to me one evening while cataloging a batch of pressed specimens, and she said it the same way she said everything about her past, accurately and without self-pity, the way you report a weather pattern you have lived through. And she would stay until the air got complicated, and then she would move on, and the warmth that pointed northwest would come with her, unnamed, carried the way she carried everything, quietly, without asking it to mean anything, until the day she could no longer pretend it meant nothing. And now? I asked. She was pressing a cutting of river willow flat between 2 boards, the ink already starting on her palm, the morning light from the south window making the still room green and warm around her. She looked at me, the quick-eyed practical woman who had burned a card and run for 3 towns and ended up behind a fish barrel. And behind her, steadier than any of that, was the woman in the silver grass, finally turned around. Now, she said, the air has stopped being complicated. The still room smells like rain and river willow and moon clover, and the mark at her wrist is the same temperature as the one at mine. And my wolf, who was patient for years and pointed for 8 weeks, and is patient no more, is entirely and completely at rest. I kept the sachet she gave me in Grenwick. It sits on my writing desk, where I see it every morning, the small cloth packet of dried moon clover, soft at the edges, smelling of rain. The complimentary sachet from a 5-coin reading, the one she had been intending to give me all along. I know what it means, now, that the cards were right. She still insists they are only interpretive. We have had this conversation perhaps a dozen times now, in various forms, and it ends the same way each time, with her looking at the mark at her wrist, and then at mine, and then out the south window at the winter light on the courtyard, and then back at whatever she was pressing or cataloging, which I have come to understand is her version of having the last word. I no longer argue the point. I have simply learned, as one learns these things slowly and with great contentment, that there are some arguments more interesting to continue than to win. The still room is warm, the sachet is on my desk, the moon clover smells like rain. That is enough. That is, it turns out, more than enough.